Alright, so now, for now, let's just turn down the portamento and turn off the always. By the way, if you turn on always but leave portamento at 0, it won't work, of course. Like, it's kind of obvious, but just so I have said that to you, you have to put at least some portamento, because portamento times 0 milliseconds is like not working. You have to at least have something like 20-30 milliseconds and then turn always onto here, actually in effect. So over there we have the voicing. Could be kind of confusing because this voicing section isn't like super divided to the portamento and to the velocity no control, but the voicing is actually only this headline right here and those two buttons, poly and this kind of indicator which says 0 of 8. Okay, so what does voicing do? When we talk about voicing and unison, there are a couple of ways to confuse it with different areas where you can use voices and unison. In this case, oscillator A and oscillator B have an indicator that says unison, but actually what you're doing, you're adding voices to one oscillator. With the voicing section, which are in unison, of course, in this voicing section, you can say how much voices are allowed to be played at the same time simultaneously. So how many voices can be played simultaneously, and that Serum allows, because there are like two things that come to mind. One thing maybe because the sound shouldn't be that complex, and if you don't want too many voices being played and you have something like crazy, like you have some low chords, high chords, and a melody that is playing in one MIDI clip and one one plugin, one Serum instance, there are a lot of voices, and you may say, okay, as soon as I hit the chords and play the melody, the chords should disappear because I only want like 8 voices max that being played, okay? And maybe you have figured it out by now for yourself. Those voices aren't related to these voices. These voices are unison voices that are created by the oscillator. These voices are related to the key that is being played. So 1 voice, 2, and 3 voices. Even though I have 3 voices right here, and we're playing right now 3 voices, for this voicing section, it only counts as 1 voice because only 1 key is being played. And this is why we can have something like 16 unison voices right here, and the limit is set to 8 voices. So the poly count, the polyphony, is the official, like not official, but the term for the voices regarding the keyboard. In a sense, I hope that makes sense. So if we shrink this down to 3, let's take a listen when I play those notes. Did you hear the lowest key disappear? So let me turn down this to 1 again. Low, mid, let's do that. The low, so as you can see, the low key is disappearing because we're playing 4 voices. We're playing a polyphony of 4. And we have set a limit to 3. So what does that mean? How is Serum deciding which notes to play and which not? And this is very simple. It's based on the latest notes. So it's only using the latest notes that have been played. So we're playing the lowest key at first and then continuing with the next octave. As soon as I hit voice number 4, it starts to delete or to ignore the last chord that has been played, or a note, sorry, the last note that has been played, and which is in this case the lowest octave. So as you can see, we have a indicator right here that is saying, okay, the maximum voices is 3, and if we increase that, you can see, it's going up. If we increase that again to 16, you can see 48 voices. And now it makes sense because the polyphony allows 3 voices, but we have 16 unison voices right here. And now it's time for math. Multiply 3 times 16 and you get it, it's 48. So we have maximum available amount of 48 voices, and as soon as I play one note, we can see, oh, we're playing 16, 32, 84. I'm sorry, that's quite loud, right? I should pitch the keyboard down so I can play lower octaves. Yeah, this is how this combine works. So you can say, multiply the polyphony by the unison voices, and you have the total amount of allowed voices. If I shrink this down to 1 and add oscillator B, you can see, okay, 1 here, polyphony 3, so 3 notes can be played together, and it's triggering one unison voice here, one unison voice here, so 3 notes trigger each note 2 voices, so together 6 voices. The maximum is at 6 voices. Okay, this is just an indicator for you to see actually how much voices you could play and how much voices are actually being played. So the default is by 8. I think 8 is way enough, or chords is like also for like future-based chords. They are mostly very wide, and also hardstyle chords are wide as well. If you have like this epic leads and super source, 8 voices or a polyphony of 8 is pretty enough. You shouldn't have the or you don't need to change the polyphony probably at all at most patches. And the only thing that you might want to change this is when you're when you want to use something like a superstar and you don't use 16 voices, but you only use like 7 voices, which really is enough. You can, if you still have some CPU issues and your PC says like, okay, no, that's too much voices, I can't handle this, you can then shrink down the polyphony amount and see at which voices your PC has again, or your Mac. Yeah, okay, that's fine with me. So that's also a thing how you, or when you want to change this to a lower thing. If you have something like a very powerful PC and you want to increase the voices, even though you have unison voices in oscillator A and B at 16, and you still want to use more voices and play more notes. For example, you have, I don't know why, but maybe you have something like a chord which has at 7, at 9, and at 11. So you have like 5 notes there. You add sus2, so you have like 6 notes. You have add 4 and maybe even a 6th note, so you have like 7 or 8 notes for your chord. Then you have a double octave bass that has been played, so you have something like 10 notes. And then you add in the same patch, you add like a melody that is playing 3 notes at a time. You have like 15 notes. Then you may want to increase the polyphony to make it work to, like, you could use 32, but I think 16 should be fine then. And then you can play bass chords, like very complex chords and melody, all in one MIDI clip with one oscillator, or one zero instance, one synthesizer at a time. I don't know if that's the best idea, but it's possible, you can do that. Okay, so the more important thing in this voicing section is actually the mono and legato. Let's check out what happens when I use something like, let's just create a quick lead sound to make this obvious. Like, let's use some, no, not this distortion, let's use some diet. So let's say you want to play something like that. You can see if I turn off the distortion, it kind of works, but you want this more aggressive lead. And it starts to like scream at you pretty much. And the reason why that is because you can play multiple notes at once. So I can play 2 notes, I can play chords. And because of the release, when I play all those notes really quickly after one another, they are overlapping. So what I can do is say, okay, let's turn this one to mono and see what happens. We don't have any annoying frequencies that are resonating. We don't have any annoying frequencies that are driving too hard. We, by driving too hard, I mean that are driving and we get something like a squished and completely annoying sound, distortion sound. And this is because when I play one note and play the next, the first note that has been played before is being cut. So the same goes for the thing when you hit too much polyphony voices. When you hit one note, this is pretty much polyphony of one, mono. So mono doesn't mean it's like mono without left and right. It's like squished into center. It's mono in terms of voices. So you only have one voice available. And as soon as you hit another voice, it's cutting, like literally cutting the last voice or all the other voices that you've been played before. So when we now turn on legato, see what happens. So not a lot actually, as you can hear. So legato, basically, if we take a step back, what legato actually means is when we take a look at the MIDI, the piano roll right here, and click legato, it's kind of changing those notes. If we take a look at these, only select like these notes and hit legato, you can see, okay, it's increasing the length of the note till the next note is played, till the next note is played, till the next note is played. So what does it do in Serum? So to find out, let's hover over it, legato. This determines whether or not envelopes, so we're talking about this section right here, or LFOs, if set to envelope or trigger mode. We covered that before in the previous lecture. So basically means LFO is pretty much a envelope. Will re-trigger if a second note is played. And this is very important. So when we play something like, let's create a quick patch for that. So we don't want to use mono in this case. We just want to use that for the filter, and we set this to envelope, set the filter pretty low, mod that or map that to there, and we have something like that. Okay, so as you can see, when I hit legato, now you can hear a difference. And what actually happens when I turn this off and hit F and then hit G, it changes how the LFO works and the function right here. So when I turn it off and hit F, it starts the envelope. When I hit G and continue to hold G, F, so both notes, it starts the LFO and the envelope again. So all those notes are again being affected by this modulation right here. If I turn this to legato and hit F and then A, you can see all those envelopes aren't triggered again. So this is what's been referred to as re-trigger. And this can be very useful for bassline movements. So for this example, let's create some, let's deactivate this one, some nice movement right here. And in this case, we want to use mono. And we get this nice glide effect without actually gliding. So let's play with something. So to trigger this pluck effect, what you want to do is actually release all notes and then play again. Only when you release all notes, you can then re-trigger the notes. So to play something like a quick bass line, and we should set this to solo, of course. Let's start with something like that. And maybe do, come on, no, yeah, that's good. Do something like that. So we're moving down. Normally it would, if we set this to off, it would play something like this. And if you duplicate the loop a couple of times, we want to set this to maybe, I don't know, B sharp, B flat, I'm sorry, and then go to F, and then go to A, and set this 1 octave higher. There we go. So it would sound like this. And we don't want this attack on all notes, but we want an attack at the beginning of each bar. So we could either use one synthesizer for the first notes and a second synthesizer where we don't have this attack, this transient, for the other notes. Well, that's kind of annoyingly much work, so we just can't hit legato and see and listen what happens. Still the same. Why is that? So let's overlap these notes. You can see now, because it's overlapping, it's not actually triggering again. So you don't have to, what I did here, leave a gap between those notes. You only have to release, and you can immediately in the next bar or beat or whatever, 8th note, you can immediately set the next note. This counts as a release, okay? So this counts as a release, this doesn't, because you're overlapping. And if you're zooming in and just doing like this tiny, listen, it still counts as an overlap, okay? So it's pretty direct there. If you want to overlap these as well, do that. So you can create some nice overlapping effects, and you may say, okay, that's not that cool that this isn't overlapping because you want to glide between two same notes. In this case, legato doesn't make sense because you're triggering a note again without the envelopes. So it's still the same note. You don't have this envelope effect in there. So it's continuing the same sound as it is here in here. So you can actually just do that and overlap again. And by that, you can actually control where you want to have an attack and transient. You can say, okay, I still want a transient right here. And you just can make that. So A still has a transient. And again, you can say, okay, this next repetition, I want to have on the 3, I want to have a transient as well. And that's pretty nice. You have to get the hang of that. But as soon as you do, you have a lot of control about the patch and how the sound works. It's quite a lot of like tweaking in the piano roll work, a little bit of work to actually set each MIDI note up to work the way you want it. But you can do it that way and create some nice bass lines and some details. So it's really worth it to spend this time, this amount of going into the piano roll again and changing those notes to create a nice moving and groovy bass line and create some texture, some tone, because you can use that LFO when you set it to envelope as well for something like the phasing. So let's set this to phaser and to the mix amount. So you can see or hear, better hear, that there is only a phasing effect that is decaying when the note is played. When the note is re-triggered, the LFO is re-triggered, the envelope is re-triggered, and not when you're gliding between notes. So that could be a nice example how you can make a really good use of those legato functions. So let me delete this. We don't need this phaser anymore. Yeah, that's pretty much been it for the voicing section. So there's not much more to tell you about this voicing right here. We will talk about the unison voices, which is right here in the advanced section as well. Again, this is a little bit more complex, and this voicing section is actually, this is why it's called unison, to divide it better from voicing and use something like unison here. This unison section is related to this unison voices control in this case. Okay, so we're done with the intermediate section now. So you have knowledge over all the basic features, you have knowledge over all the intermediate features, and the advanced features we only will cover something like I said the units control, the chaos, and about the wavetable editing. So when we go over to this tab, which you have on those two main oscillators right here and right here also, you can edit the wavetable. I have done that before a couple of times in the previous videos, but then we will actually talk about what you can do and how this works right here. So these are the more advanced things that we will cover in the advanced section. But before we go into the advanced section, we want to create some sounds again. So in the next section, we will continue with our chord design. Yeah, let's get to it.